Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. When many of us wake up, they open the bedroom window and look up at the sky to see what the weather is like today. I mean, the weather is hot, so we lighten our clothes, or is it cold, so we wear heavy clothes to keep warm? Are there storms and hurricanes or not, so let's stay at home better? And if someone else doesn't want to get out of bed, open the window and see the weather, they can also pick up their phone, open Google, and type in the search field, and Google will do the extra work for them. And tell him how the weather is today, and how you will work all week too. Surprisingly, a large percentage of these predictions are correct. But have you ever thought about how meteorologists know the weather days in advance? Hello, I am Mohammed Saleh, but before we start, if you are still new to the channel, do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell so that our videos reach you first. From the red button below. Be good and subscribe to the channel. The Babylonians, about 650 years ago, tried to predict the weather in various ways. In the words of Australian meteorologist Richard Whittaker, these predictions were made by observing the sky and the shapes of clouds in it. That is, if the sky is slightly red at sunset, then the weather will be sunny the next day. And if there are cumulus clouds in the sky, then most likely the weather will become cold, and this cumulus cloud will remain as if it were separate points in the sky, as in the picture in front of you. Besides the sky and the forms of clouds in it, they also relied on astrology in a semi-fundamental way. But then, nearly 300 years later, the Greek philosopher Aristotle wrote an essay in which he discussed some of the theories that explain the formation of clouds, rain, winds, and hurricanes. This article was called Met. Although his article was published about 2,360 years ago. However, some of the ideas mentioned by Aristotle were correct. Among them is the hydrological cycle, which describes the journey of water on the planet. From being liquid and present in the seas and oceans until it evaporates and merges with the atmosphere. This article is said to have settled as the main reference that people have relied on to understand and predict the weather for more than 2 millennia. People's knowledge of weather and meteorology remained limited to the color of the sky and the shape of the clouds in it, and this hadith has some knowledge of horoscopes and astrology, which is unnecessary. This made predictions incorrect most of the time. Somewhat in the 17th and 18th centuries, people's concept of weather evolved greatly. The reason for this is the laws formulated by, such as the gas pressure, temperature, and density laws discovered by the two scientists, Roble Boyle and Gacy Carles. And those who, due to their laws and other laws of scientists, people began to learn more about previously unknown aspects of the atmosphere. Ideas of all kinds are beginning to blossom. For us, such as a barometer that measures atmospheric pressure, and a thermometer that measures temperature. But for all the knowledge that people have acquired over the past 2 centuries, we didn't get much use out of this knowledge before the 19th century. In the mid-19th century, coinciding with the invention of the telegraph, meteorologists were able to send each other observations about the weather, such as temperature and wind direction. And also in a very short time, no matter how far away they are. To receive and record these observations in maps, they called them synoptic weather maps. Based on the maps and the observations in them, the scientists could know the state of the atmosphere in the different regions. They also study the evolution that occurs to him over time. Since then, the accuracy of weather forecasting has increased dramatically. The first organization to apply this method was the United States government's Smithsonian Corporation through its Weather Observation Network, which it established in the year 1849. 5 years after the establishment of this network, specifically in the year 1954, the United Kingdom government decided that it would establish the first meteorological office in the world. The purpose of its creation was to collect data on the weather. However, the bureau chief was not allowed to make any predictions based on the data he had collected. Until 1959, when a storm occurred near the northern coast of the British island of Ingas. It was the cause of the sinking of the Royal Charter ship and the deaths of over 450 people. After that, the British government allowed for the chief of the office the establishment of a network of 15 stations situated at separate places within the United Kingdom, so that he could receive weather reports from all these stations, and thus warn ships of any possible storms, and they had already begun to rely on these forecasts, basically, until 1861, which was the same year they started doing the first daily weather bulletin, according to magazines. and then not long after the establishment of the Met Office in Britain, the establishment of the United States Congress decided to establish an office specialized in weather forecasting, which it was later called the National Weather Service. Let's go back a bit to the early 20th century when a Norwegian mathematician was able to formulate some equations with which he was able to accurately predict the weather and call them primitive equations. At the beginning of the emergence of these equations, they did not have much and noticeable benefit. To take advantage of it, we needed a great deal of data on the state of the atmosphere in different regions at the same time. This was something almost impossible in this period. But with the advent of 1946, the idea of predicting the weather digitally was no longer impossible at all. Finally, the first computer capable of solving thousands of equations in real time was built. Of course, meteorologists did not miss such an opportunity and decided to use this device to solve primitive equations, because the year 1950 AD will be the first year in which we get the first digital weather forecast. From 1950 until now, an amazing development has occurred. Of course, this is due to the terrible developments that have taken place in measuring devices, as well as the computers that rely on them to solve primitive equations. But also, a very important thing is the appearance of the invisible soldier in meteorology, and what scientists cannot completely dispense with now in weather forecasting. And this soldier is a meteorological satellite, which is simply a satellite, and its primary function is to monitor the weather and climate on the planet. These satellites are divided into two main types. Satellites in geostationary orbit, which is located directly above the equator. Its movement also coincides with the movement of the planet Earth itself. This keeps it above the same part of the ground all the time. As for the other types, they are polar satellites, which are located at an altitude of about 850 kilometers near the poles. Its lower altitude also makes it able to take more accurate pictures of the atmosphere. These satellites move vertically from the North Pole to the South Pole twice a day. This makes it able to collect a lot of weather data, about any point on the Earth's surface. But although it collects a lot of data, and its data is also accurate, we cannot rely on it alone, because it does not cover the same part of the Earth all day. Since it is moving, this means that this contrasts with what satellites in geostationary orbit do. This is why these two types of satellites complement each other in the meteorological process, but I wonder how we can use these satellites to predict the weather, and know the winds and their directions. After we know the history of surveillance and how the case evolved from year to year, let us know how to predict the weather itself will happen. Weather forecasting goes through three main stages. The first is the weather monitoring phase. Weather variables, such as atmospheric pressure, humidity, and temperature, are measured. This is done through measuring tools used by specialists who are constantly present in meteorological stations. With the help of artificial age images, taken in infrared, to measure the amount of clouds, their temperature, as well as their movement. Based on this data, we can deduce the wind speed and direction. Then we reach the second stage, where all this data is collected and passed on to the supercomputers located in the weather forecasting centers. And who, in turn, enters this data into the primitive equations that we talked about a little while ago, to show us some models that predict the change that will occur in the weather over time, which are now called simulation models for digital weather forecasting. After that, we reach the third and final stage, which is the stage in which it is confirmed that the weather conditions are according to the models that have appeared. And in the event that there are any errors, it is modified and compared with the forecasts of other meteorological centers around the world, so that it is finally announced to people, and you can learn about it in 1 second from your phone. And that's how we ended up, who came here. Everyone who made it to the end of the video, you are the best people. Give us a like before exiting so we know how many people made it to the end of the episode. And don't forget, if a question comes to you day or night and confuses you, write it to us below the video so that we can answer it. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.